Okay, this one is more intentional to be recorded because I actually missed this day where we covered the Enlightenment Part 2. Um, I've decided to have Part 1 and Part 2 because the Enlightenment era is actually going to be really heavily tested on Unit 3. And so I want you guys to have you guys ready. I want you to know all the information. So again, I'm sorry for missing this day with you guys, but the Enlightenment era, sorry, was a period of revolutionary ideas that influenced the American Revolution, which we'll go over on Tuesday. So thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau contributed ideas that changed the way people thought about the government and individual rights, correct? So let's see how their philosophies paved the way for independence. All right, so we made it to slide 2. Um, so yeah, we're just gonna go over the Enlightenment from part 1. Get you guys more, not a deep understanding. This is just, like I said, going over part 1 basically. So let's go ahead and get started. The Enlightenment was also called the Age of Reason, right? It was a period of intellectual and philosophical developments from the late 1600s to the early 1800s. It talked about reason, individual rights, and the idea of progress. And like we said, some of the thinkers that we talked about from part 1 was John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire. Well, I don't think we talked about Voltaire in part 1, but we'll talk a little bit about him in part 2. And so these principles had a deep influence on colonial America, contributing to their push for independence. And so you guys go ahead and write it down. Like it says, it talks about on the slide, it talked about reason and individual rights and the idea of progress. That's pretty much the Enlightenment. And those leaders, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire, well, they had a really big they contributed a lot to the Enlightenment, right? But we'll talk about more of that in part 2, this coming lecture right here. And so go ahead and write it down, and let's move on. Okay, so this slide has no highlighted, I decided not to highlight anything so you guys don't have to write it down, but I decided just to add this in there just to kind of give you more of an understanding. So let's talk about more of the big ideas that came from the Enlightenment, right? So, like we talked about in part 1, we have natural rights. John Locke said that people should have life, liberty, and property. And then we talked about the social contract, the idea that the government powers comes from the consent of the people. And this was both John Locke and Rousseau. Popular sovereignty, the government's legitimacy is based on the will of the people. And then we also had reason and rationality, in which was the Enlightenment thinkers believed in using to question authority and to make decisions. So that's basically what's talking about on this slide. It's the key ideas for from the Enlightenment. Like you guys see John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Keep that in mind. Those guys are really important during this time period and will be on Unit 3 exam. So go ahead and let's move on. There's no writing down. Just want to go over that real quick. So let's talk about the impact on colonial America, right? Sorry for the missaying pronunciation of colonial. Colonialists began to question the British authority, right, leading to growing of suspicion during this time period. The Enlightenment principles had shown in key political documents such as Tom Paine's Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence. The colonists also moved towards republicanism, which is a favoring of government where representatives are elected by the people. And so go ahead and write that down. That's pretty much the impact on colonial America. Go ahead and write down the highlighted if you haven't already. But I'm just, like I said, I'm going over this because I'm sorry that I was absent for this lecture. So we'll go ahead and move on. Next thing we're going to talk about in this slide is the Declaration of Independence. So let's go ahead and talk about it, right? The Declaration of Independence is one of the most important documents in U.S. history. It was written mainly by Thomas Jefferson in 1776. It officially marked the separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain, adopted by the Continental Congress on July 4th, 1776. It laid the new philosophical foundation of a new nation, right? So that's pretty much what it talked about. It's a big deal, and that's why we have the 4th of July, right? And like I said, 76, I always tie it in with the 76ers in Philadelphia, the Big Bell. And I always say 67 rather than 76, but that's okay, right? I always make mistakes. But let's go ahead and write it down, and let's move on. So I had to make a part 2 for the slide because a lot of information didn't fit on one. As you guys can see, that's a whole lot of list of bullet points that I provided you guys. But for this document in particular, right, it reflected a lot of key principles from the Enlightenment. So such as men are created equal, they have rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when I mentioned the life, one of the rights, pursuit of happiness is not referring to Kid Cudi. One time in high school, some guy was insistent that that's where it came from, the song from Declaration of Independence. But that's a whole other story that I probably share with you guys later on. Governments get their power from consent to the governed. And if the government doesn't protect these rights, people can change or abolish it, which we'll talk about later in the other slides. And the declaration also listed grievances against King George III, right? Like, for example, it was imposing taxes without consent, denying trial by jury, and dissolving representative houses, right? So that's pretty much the part 2 of it. I just explained to you guys. It showed a lot of key from the Enlightenment, but we'll go ahead and move on. You guys can write it down, and let's go. All right, so this is more like a little review from part 1, right? So in 1776, all right, keep messing it up, I don't know, sorry. Thomas Paine published The Common Sense, a pamphlet that argued for American independence, like we talked about. He used Enlightenment areas to push for democratic republic and argue against the monarchical rule. In this pamphlet, it talks of support for the revolution, not just among elites, but also amongst ordinary colonists, right? So, you guys can go ahead and write it down. And like I said, I need to just keep pushing for that year, 1776. Philadelphia 76ers, right? Philadelphia. Anyway, go ahead and write this down and we'll move on. So, the next thing we'll be talking about in slide 8 is Baron de Montesquieu, right? He was a French political philosopher who greatly influenced modern political theory. And he's best known for his ideas about separation of powers and how governments should be structured will be a better appropriate word. But go ahead. This is real brief. Like I said, I'm going to let you guys do most of the carrying when it comes to learning about some of these figures during the gallery walk, which was supposed to be Monday. But like I said, I missed it. So go ahead and write it down, and we could go on. Just two things you got to write down in this one. So make it quick. Let's move on. So this is just a little, I wouldn't say review, but we're kind of jumping ahead a few years, and this is the U.S. Constitution, right? I just decided to be here because we're talking about, the separation of powers and how power should be in the 13 colonies, the Enlightenment era, and so I decided just to put this in here for the future. We'll be talking about the Constitution in Unit 3. But yeah, let's go ahead and just go over this real quick. The U.S. government was divided into 3 branches that I provided you guys in the slide. Congress, it was the legislative branch, right? The House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives that make laws, right? The executive branch is the president enforces the laws, right? And judicial branch is the courts, including Supreme Court. They ensure they follow the Constitution. They kind of review the laws, and they have the right to veto it and whatnot. And before it becomes a law, it's a lot of steps in order to become a law, right? So we'll go over that when we get to that part of the unit. Sorry, but like I said, I just want to throw it out there because we are talking about not the branches of governments, where you guys know where I'm going with this, but we're talking about the powers and everything and how it should be placed. So yeah, go ahead and write those down. Like I said, this is just like a pre-review, I guess you could say. So we had talked about the three branches in the last slide, right? And so this slide is pretty much the same. Just before we go into it deeper later on, I just want to add it to the PowerPoint. But this is checks and balances, right? You guys should remember this from 8th grade. If not, we'll go ahead and review it. But checks and balances prevent any one of the branches of government from being too powerful, right? Each branch has the ability to check the other branches to maintain balance. And this was basically this is a system key to separation of powers and functioning a democratic government. So go ahead and write it down. We'll go over this more when we hit that part of the unit. But yeah. Okay, so this is the last slide of the lecture, part 2. If you guys haven't already, I'm pretty sure you guys already did the gallery walk and completed that worksheet as well. I'll be checking it. Hopefully you guys had a good time during learning about the alignment. But let's go ahead and conclude this lecture with the conclusion, right? So the alignment had profound effects on colonial ideas about government, rights, and independence. It emphasized on natural rights, social contracts, and reason to inspire the colonists to change the British rule that was happening during that time. And these ideas laid a foundation for the American Revolution we're going to go over tomorrow, which is today, which is Tuesday, right? And creation of the new land based on democratic principles. So this is the alignment. This is part 2. So just keep that in mind. Study for the alignment. I will try to give you as much resources as I can so you guys can have more in depth of the alignment if you want to learn more. I'm planning to print out the common sense and all that, the documents printed during that time. And but yeah, thank you for watching this lecture if you watched it. If not, you're missing out, man. I mean, this is it's pretty cool. But yeah, hope you guys have a good evening, good morning, whatever you're watching this. But thank you for listening.